Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Marilyn Clark of the Lead Seat. Today, my guest is Theresa Carik. Theresa is an organizational and leadership development leader with over 30 years of experience in both consulting and corporate roles. Theresa helps organizations and their leaders and employees improve their effectiveness through holistic and integrative approaches, linking behavior change to business impact. She's also a talent management expertise, spans the entire life cycle of an employee, including succession planning of CEOs and other C-suite roles, board effectiveness assessment and selection, executive coaching, competency modeling, team development, and leadership development programs. She has broad industry experience, including private equity, financial, retail, automotive, healthcare, manufacturing, sales and service, and higher education. And welcome, Theresa, to the Lead Seat.
Good morning. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, what an impressive background. Well, today, Theresa and I are going to take up the subject of succession planning. We thought that would be nice that to put something out there as far as leaders are concerned when it comes to that. So the first thing Theresa, I want to talk to you about is what are your thoughts about the importance of succession planning? What's the
Yeah,
importance of that?
thank you. Yeah, it's extremely important, just kind of bottom line for organizations to really think about and put some efforts in. Changes happen, whether they're expected or not, and you really need to have a plan in place on how that leadership is going to continue, how there really isn't going to be a break in it for any significant amount of time. And so, thinking about who would go into the next seat or slide in is really important. And, a lot of that around that really relates to having to do then development for your individuals. And a lot of people, that's why they stay. I mean, actually, that's why they stay with organizations. They want to keep growing. They want to keep developing. And so then you have more engagement, you have the retention of individuals. Another piece around succession and why organizations really want to work on it is just at times we actually know when people are moving out, they might be retiring. And wouldn't it be great if like that person could just, take their head off and hand it off to the next person, right?
Yeah, right.
But we can't do that. And no matter how much you try to write things out and put things in, in written form or in, kind of binders, in kind of thinking old fashioned way, there's no way you can actually just kind of tell somebody in a short term period of everything they need to know. So especially when you know of impending movements, having a plan in place to help transfer that knowledge to the next person in play, to the organization overall, that becomes just part of the succession process. And then finally, I would say that really, having this in place gives you a little bit more competitive advantage. It helps make any organization more adaptable or agile because you're thinking about what are the skills that you need next, right? It's not just about the here and now. Good succession planning thinks about what's our competition going to be in the near future? How are things going to change? And making sure you're ready to some extent for those changes.
Okay. All right, thanks. What are some common misconceptions about succession planning and how can organizations address these to foster a more inclusive approach to talent development?
Sure, sure. So just the bottom line, first of all, is that succession planning is hard. It
Okay,
really
right,
is. And we'll
right.
talk more about what goes into it, but it takes a lot of time and effort. And so, along with that, people think that it's only really for your CEO, your C-suite, your top of the house. And when you do that, you're actually really limiting your pipeline, right? You
Mhm.
need to know that who's next. So once that one domino falls, the domino, it's a long line of dominoes, basically in an
Mhm.
organization. And if you're not thinking all the way down that track, then you're going to have some challenges. Um, Another thing, and again, this goes into part of that why it makes it hard to do, is that people or organizations sometimes think it's just a one and done, and then that's it. And I've actually seen that in organizations
Mhm.
where they spend all this time, take a whole month and they go through certain roles and they talk about the slate and what development needs people need, and then they just put it away.
Right.
And and then inevitably a role opens up that they weren't expecting. And instead of going back to the slate, they are scrambling. And that really wasn't, it should be, it is a process. It should be continuous. You don't have to go through the deep dive every time, but it should be about, hey, what are we doing now for this person for development? What's next? So, oh, is someone else, moving or ready to move, that we have to think about? So the idea that you can do it, check the box, and that's it, is also a misconception. Um, another piece around that is that you should only be thinking about replacement. Like if you know the impending retirement,
Mhm.
that's the role we should be thinking about and who's next, and really focus the succession on that. And it really is more about the whole pipeline, right? Again, from the top going down, and what growth needs to happen. And again, you want to retain people. So you want to develop them and keep them, and the person who's moving on, it isn't necessarily that they're moving out of the organization, it's that they're moving to someplace else in it. So how, again, do all those movements happen or need to happen?
Mhm. Mhm.
So uh, and finally, I'd say that just really a lot of people think that it's an HR process, right?
Okay.
Succession is just like, you all take care of it. It's a people thing. It doesn't have a business impact, which is really further from the truth. It has huge business impacts. Um, but it's not just HR. Like, it is an all in, everybody's responsible, everybody's a leader, everyone has to be thinking about their leader. So, with that, how do you start addressing some of these things? And, from a high level or broader level, um, the first thing is communication. And it seems like whether it's personal or professional, whatever issues are going on, communication is always right, the bottom line, right? Like
Right.
start, you can never communicate too much.
No.
You're
Mhm.
gonna communicate, and then
Mhm.
communicate some more. So
Right.
um but really, why are we doing this? What's the intention? What's the process? And aligning that with where the organization is going. So again, that's why we're doing it. And it'll start to crystallize for people,
Mhm.
um, as to the importance for actually following this through.
Mhm. Yep.
Uh, Also, just involving others. So we talked about that it's not just an HR piece, an HR initiative. The more leaders you can involve in the process, in the development, the more skin they're going to have in the game. And they often have their own success stories, right? So how they came to be in their own roles, and those stories and stories of others, and kind of the paths that people took, these are all should be all part of the communication package to the organization, to the employees. And it gets people really excited, like, oh, I can see a career here, I
Mhm.
can see that development support, that that's important to me.
Right.
So there's a number of things that we can, at least again, even on a broad perspective, start thinking about to
Mhm.
help with some of the challenges.
Right. It's really just as important as the strategic business plan. So, and it should be right along, parallel with the strategic business plan. I would,
Absolutely.
right, right. I would totally agree with that. Um, Well, you said that you did mention that succession planning isn't solely for the top level, but why is it also essential to cultivate a culture of development across all levels of the
Yeah.
organization?
Yeah, so again, if we look only at the top level,
Mhm,
we're really limiting the pipeline. And again, going back to that domino analogy, it's not like just one,
mhm,
two fall and then you're okay, and the rest of the organization is, we don't have to think about. It's a real long line. As one person moves, another one or two people are going to move, and it just kind of keeps going
mhm,
and going. It's very exponential. So we never want to really restrict that talent pool and be caught in potentially a shortage or just not having somebody ready to some extent. So um, if you again only thinking about those at the top of the house as you move, to your senior, middle, even individual contributors, it can actually feel like that you're not part of the organization
mhm,
or not as important. And everyone really does have a role. Like again, I'm a firm believer that regardless of the role, regardless of if you're even managing people, you're all leaders. You're all leaders
right.
to an extent. And so, if you think if the organization is just focused at the top, it doesn't feel so good for everybody else. So we want to really, ward against that, not have, the engagement issues or retention issues. So again, just really thinking about development and growth for everybody. Um, the other thing that can be even more of an issue, and I think we talk about it, we've been talking about, we still have opportunity around diversity, whether it's gender, race, whatever, even just diversity of thought. I mean, just
Mhm,
that basic concept that when you don't have a good plan in place and you leave it to the person who might be exiting or you're scrambling, you go with what you're comfortable with,
mhm,
and that can just inadvertently like perpetuate this lack of diversity of, again, any kinds. Like
right,
picks like.
right,
So
right.
um in trying to think more about this whole culture and development, because it really is, that's the what you want to get to more broadly,
Mhm,
right? We've focused on for several years, organizations going to like a coaching culture. Like we've heard that phrase in many ways.
yeah,
And that's one piece. That's
right.
one piece to a culture of development. And
Mhm,
when you
right.
do it well, again, you have happier employees, you have more skilled employees, they're engaged. It just leads to more productivity. Again, the research bears this out, where organizations, they have good cultures of development, good succession planning, they have multiples of return on investment
Mhm,
for themselves. They
mhm,
have higher engagement levels, lower talent acquisition costs.
mhm,
So it all leads to really positive things.
mhm,
Um, and when things change, and things do change, you can really spin much more quickly on it. I
mhm,
think about, just organizations that naturally develop and work on things, or even when it becomes something new, people are used to learning and developing, it
mhm,
helps them with the change. And so
right.
4 years ago, when everything went remote,
Mhm,
remote leadership is very, very different. Organizations that, I worked with, that were already embracing, hey, we constantly teach our people, we constantly develop them. Maybe it was a new skill that they had to learn quickly, but it was, again, just part of, hey, we are always learning, it helps us be agile. They were able to really flip
right,
from in-person
right.
to remote
Mhm,
very easily.
mhm,
uh, and finally, what I'd say on this is that you are a brand. Every organization is a brand. Every person that works for that organization is a walking billboard,
mhm,
right?
right.
And you know, you don't want negative press. We all want positive press. And so when people, again, they feel good, they feel they're growing, they feel like an organization is investing in them,
Mhm.
it means that I'm going to talk about my company. I'm
Mhm.
going to be like, hey, you should come work for us. This is what they do. This is how they treat us. And no organization can really afford it to not be a positive
Right,
brand out there, or again, the walking billboard. So there's just a number of reasons why organizations really benefit from embracing succession and then leading to this culture of development.
right. I know for me, when I think about the soapbox that I have been on for years when it comes to leadership. And that's really digging deep into the organization because I've seen so much wasted
Yeah.
talent because it just wasn't seen as necessary to investigate that talent.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have folks that are outgoing and, speak up or are really engaged with that. But then sometimes we have the quiet ones that we need to look at too, because they a lot of times bring a lot to the table, but yeah, they may not be exposed or seen as much as someone that we feel is a high potential. And
Yeah.
so I always struggled with that when you said high potentials because I think leadership should always be on the lookout for the up and coming, but also pay attention to the ones that may not be as vocal or as exposed. That
Yeah.
could possibly be your next, C-suite person. So
Yeah.
I get it. So, and I've
Yeah.
always been about learning organizations. I mean, forever, it's like push, push, push learning organizations. And you're totally right. When people stay, when they feel that that development they're getting is showing that they feel valued because you're
Absolutely.
interested in me. You
Yeah.
really care about me. And
Yeah.
so that's very important to have that type of push out when it comes to, organizations. You're right. It's not just an HR thing. It
Yeah.
really isn't. Maybe we need to coach some of the leaders and how to do this, Theresa. And then, it won't fall so much on HR just to say HR. It's supposed to be HR's responsibility.
Yeah. A
Um,
couple things there on what you
uh-huh.
said. So absolutely. So in all the data over, I mean, years and years of research, and
Hmm.
and having the pleasure to work with some of these organizations that constantly do this research on engagement and retention. So cash is king. That's always, it's never gonna, not to have
Right.
the number one, but it's so fleeting in terms of the, like, even bonuses and things like
Mhm.
that, because I feel like I deserve that, right? Based on what I do and the skills I bring. But next in line is always development and career opportunities. It's been consistently second for years and years and years. And so if organizations aren't thinking about it, you just always run the risk. And I also like what you said about, I call them diamonds in the rough.
Yes.
So it's those individuals that just, for whatever reason, not getting noticed, and maybe potentially being overlooked. And when you actually start doing real analysis, real assessment of individuals, especially objective
Mhm.
assessments, time and time again, I've come up to the organization and said, listen, have you thought about this person? Look at how they perform. And you
Right.
can give them some hard data around it,
Right.
and
Mhm.
they're surprised. And that's really, sometimes that's all they need, is a little grooming and support. And
Right.
it made me think. So it made me think of this example in my career years ago. New leader in, um, and I had a couple direct reports. And one of the first things that someone told me, my boss, was, "Oh, you can just go and fire so and so." And I went, "What?" And I was like, I was, why would it just fall? I'm brand new. Why would you, that doesn't
Right.
seem fair. And really, all this person needed was some development coaching, feedback,
Mm-hmm.
and she became a rock star.
Mm-hmm.
Like they couldn't believe the
Mm-hmm.
turnaround. It's like, well, it was just took a little bit of time and effort and really listening and
Right.
giving her some advice and chat and all these things. But
Mm-hmm.
it's so much, like a little bit can go so far. It's just taking the time.
That's right. You're absolutely right. Um, Next, Teresa, I wanted to talk about maybe challenges to implementing succession planning initiatives, beyond just the top of the house, as we've been saying, and how they can overcome these challenges.
Yeah, great question. So people need the other leaders outside of HR
Mhm. Right.
need to buy in, into the whole process. They need to be involved, but they need to understand why it's important. And sometimes that can be challenging because as you're doing the process,
Mhm.
like it could be a change. And so first of all, change can always be hard, like, oh,
Yes.
we're doing
For
something
some.
new.
For
And so now
some. Right.
I gotta
Yes.
learn how to do this.
Yes.
But also sometimes it shines a light on themselves and realizing they think about their own potential and trajectory and like, oh, maybe there isn't an opportunity, and that can sometimes create some negative impact for an individual. And honestly, I've also seen leaders, and I'm sure you have too, that they want to hoard their talent.
Yes.
So they put up a resistance to
Mm-hmm.
it because, oh my gosh, if I grow and develop this person and they move on, that means I'm going to have someone missing on my team who's
Right.
critical. Uh, and honestly, we know that backfires because eventually, I mean, I know of more than one person who has left
Right.
an organization
Right.
because
Because of
that
that.
came out.
Yeah.
It was very clear.
Very, very true.
Um, so buy-in is really important.
Mhm.
Just having an understanding of what the process should be, and it it really can't be willy-nilly. It's hard to actually put things in place, but you know, what's the timing? What are we doing assessments? What are the deliverables? Who has what accountabilities? Really buttoning all that up
Mhm.
and making sure people understand it, and again holding people accountable to these things. So
Yeah.
it can take a lot of heavy lifting in the beginning,
Mhm.
and when resources are limited, either between HR and leaders, and the resource of time, let's just say
Mhm.
that as
Mhm.
well. That can all come into play. um, and then sometimes when you actually get going down the path, what happens is that an organization truly realizes, like, uh-oh, we really don't have a pipeline. Like we truly don't have people ready there for whatever reasons that
Mhm.
we haven't invested. They're so busy on their current job, we're not making time and space for development. So then that can be very scary,
Mhm.
actually, for an organization to come to that conclusion. But again, there's ways to start. You got to start someplace, right?
Right.
So starting someplace is really important rather than not doing anything. So you said just so any initiative that relates to people, starting at the top is always the best. Getting your champions, making sure they understand, having them talk about it. Honestly, again, making it part of their performance measures of like,
Mhm.
what are you doing in terms of developing your people and helping identifying who's next? That can always help too. That always works.
Mhm.
The process needs to be very clear. It needs to be somewhat simple to some extent, like not don't over, complicate it,
Right.
um, making it subjective in many ways. And I would say that's actually where a lot of times HR or talent management can really play a role to kind of call some of that out. But, like, no, what truly is their performance? And let's not talk about 6 years ago and why do we think they could move forward and what do they really need and so on. So making, having some really good conversations and keeping it subjective is also very helpful.
Mhm.
And again, we talk about communication, about, what are we doing, why we're doing it, who's in, who's out, who's on the plan. That becomes a matter of debate for a lot of organizations. Do we tell people? Do we not? Um, and it's kind of like six of one, half of the or the other. I prefer transparency.
Mhm.
Um, I believe probably in the greater good, because the argument against that is, well, is the person going to then, be impatient, or are they going to hold it over us if we say they're on the next lane and they don't? It's like, if that's truly what happens with that person, do we want them part of the
Right.
organization? I just kind of
Yeah.
start having that conversation. I
I,
don't know if you had that. Have you seen that before in other organizations?
I have where then it becomes a little bit of expectation. Um, I you owe me this. It
Right.
becomes an you owe me this kind of thing. And I think about it when I used to teach at universities, and my students would feel that I bought the grade. I was like, no, you can't buy a grade here. You got to do the work. And so I, you can't buy a grade in my class. But they've always come back and said, I appreciate, the fair but firm
Yeah.
way. So I think it's a fair but firm kind of communication. And I was also thinking maybe from the bottom up, as you're saying, as you're identifying and putting in place a plan, instead of looking from the top down, maybe looking from the bottom up to see where the bottom can rise,
Yeah.
and where they can go. And it's an individual thing, but I think it's really the communication, the way that you position it to an employee to
Yes.
understand this is an opportunity if you want it. It's not that you have to take it, but we're all, in charge of our own destiny. And so from that, if that was the way it was kind of presented to me, then I have a choice.
Yeah.
And it may be, I'm ready to go. Yes, let's put me on the plan. And then it may be, let me think about it. I'm not sure right now, or I'm not at a point in my career where I
Hmm.
think I want to do that right now, but maybe give me another 6 months or a year, and I'll readdress it then.
Yeah.
So, people can be in all different spaces throughout their career and want all different things. Everybody doesn't want to, rise
Hmm.
to the top. And that's what I call my anchors, but they want to
Yeah.
be good in what they do, and they support me and I depend on them. But I think it's just all about the way we communicate it out.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And absolutely. And um, unfortunately, I've seen it backfire when organizations don't communicate and are less transparent. So then someone puts in their notice
Right.
and they're like, what? But we had this kind of, we were thinking,
Plan for you.
yeah, it's like, well, I
You
had no
fell me down.
idea. Like,
Right.
how am I supposed to
Supposed
know?
to know.
You
Right.
know? Um,
Exactly.
but and I also agree, like I always people who know me know I'm a pretty transparent leader. I will tell you as much as I can because I just
Mhm.
feel that's the right thing.
Mhm.
And when this whole thing of succession, because to your point, chapters change,
True.
right? I might be especially I think about in some really large organizations, the movement to the next role requires a movement of your
Mhm.
family.
Mhm.
And I might not be ready for that at this
Mhm.
point. You ask me in 5 years.
Mhm.
And people's chapters just change with as their life changes of what they want, what they need, what they're looking for. So that constant communication is important with all of this. So
Yeah.
it's there's lots that can be done to help really overcome the challenges. And because ultimately, we want to be successful in doing this. We want to make sure, like you think about like you are we measuring the right things. Are we making progress? Having nothing is not the best thing. Having some,
Right.
it doesn't have to be the best thing out, but slowly start working and having those plans in place for your organization. So again, you're just not taken by surprise.
Right. Hmm. You plan everything else, so why wouldn't you plan for the people side?
Exactly. Exactly.
Join us for part 2 with Dr. Carik as we discuss key steps in succession planning.